My name is Clara Bennett. I'm 31 years old. And the two people who were supposed to know me better than anyone in this world looked me in the face at their own 40th wedding anniversary party, surrounded by family, by neighbors, by 40 people who had watched me grow up, and said 4 words I will never forget. "We didn't invite you." I couldn't believe it. I stood there holding a gold gift box with a white ribbon, and before I could say a single word in response, my father pushed it off the table. Just pushed it. Like it was something that didn't belong there. Like I was something that didn't belong there. The humiliation was total. The shaming was public. And not one person in that room moved. What nobody knew, what nobody in that family had any idea about, was what was inside that box. Not a card, not flowers, not a sentimental trinket, or a polite gesture from the daughter they'd been slowly erasing for 5 years. What was inside that box was 11 pages of bank statements and an official mortgage payoff certificate, proof that I, Clara Bennett, the daughter they didn't invite, had been secretly paying to keep their house standing for 60 months straight. Including the 3 months already in arrears, the late penalties, and the accumulated interest from the beginning, the total came to $145,800. In silence. While my sister Diane took every ounce of the credit and used it to build a kingdom with my family that I was locked out of entirely. I was cheated. I was lied to. And I was backstabbed by the people who were supposed to be my foundation. Here's what's shocking. They didn't know. My parents genuinely believed it was Diane. And Diane, she let them. For 5 years. Then, when a woman named Aunt Patrice picked up that gold box in the middle of the party and started reading those documents out loud, everything broke open at once. What happened next changed everything. My parents got in their car at 7 in the morning and drove to find me, not to defend themselves, not to explain, to face what they'd done. And what I said to them that morning, at a diner 3 miles from the house I'd paid for, that's the part that might change the way you think about silence, sacrifice, and what it really means to love someone who can't see you. This is the truth, and it's been waiting long enough. My name is Clara Bennett. I'm 31 years old, and I flew over 2,800 miles to their 40th wedding anniversary party, carrying a gift wrapped in gold paper that I'd spent weeks preparing. I thought I was walking into a surprise. I walked into a rejection. I didn't come looking for applause. I came because no matter what, they were still my parents, and I still believed that love could outlast silence. I heard about the party through Aunt Patrice, but I still believed they'd want me there. I walked through that front door with a smile wide enough to cover every single crack in my chest. I couldn't believe what came next. The room was packed. Neighbors, cousins, old family friends I hadn't seen in years. And the moment my mother's eyes landed on me, something shifted. It wasn't surprise. It wasn't joy. It was closer to alarm, the kind of look someone gives when a secret is about to walk through the door uninvited. My father moved toward me before I could even say hello, and I thought, for just 1 second, that maybe he was coming in for a hug. I was wrong. So wrong. "We didn't invite you, Clara." That's what he said, right there. In front of everyone. The betrayal hit me like cold water, fast and breathless, and I felt every single eye in that room land on my face at once, watching, waiting, measuring my reaction. My cheeks burned. The humiliation was physical, like something pressing down on my sternum. And then, as if the words weren't enough, he pushed my gold gift box right off the table. It hit the floor with a sound that seemed too loud for such a small thing. A few people shifted. No one intervened. I stood there in my best blouse, holding nothing, surrounded by people who were either too shocked or too comfortable to step in. This was family drama in its rawest, ugliest form. No filter, no warning, just a door opening and dignity being shoved onto the floor alongside my present. The shame was immediate, but underneath it, something else was starting to rise. I picked up the box. I didn't cry. Not right there, not in front of them. I set it back on the table slowly, deliberately, and I looked at my father. Really looked at him. For what felt like the first time in years. There was something behind his eyes I couldn't quite read yet. Was it guilt? Embarrassment? Or was he just performing for the room, the way this family had always performed? Whatever it was, I knew one thing with absolute certainty. That box was going to stay on that table, and what was inside it was going to change everything. Nobody in that room knew what was really in that gold box. Nobody except me. And as I turned to walk toward the door with my head held high, I kept thinking about the 5 years that had brought us all to this exact devastating moment. 5 years that nobody in that room had a clue about. Not yet. Let me take you back 5 years, because none of this makes sense without the beginning. It was a Thursday afternoon in early October when my Aunt Patrice called me. Not my parents, not my sister. Me. Her voice had that careful, measured tone people use when they're about to deliver news that could unravel someone's world. She said, "Clara, honey, your parents are 3 months behind on the mortgage. The bank's already sent 2 notices. They could lose the house in Clarksburg by spring." I sat down on my kitchen floor in Portland and just breathed. The house in Clarksburg, West Virginia, a beige 2-story on Maple Creek Road with a broken porch step and a kitchen that always smelled like cinnamon. That house was everything. It was where I grew up, where I learned to ride a bike, where I cried after my first heartbreak, where family dinners used to feel like something real before everything got complicated. And now the bank was circling it like a vulture. I felt sick. But I also felt something sharper, a need to act, fast and quietly, before the worst happened. Here's the part that still stings when I think about it. My sister Diane was already aware of the situation. Aunt Patrice had told her 2 weeks before she told me, and when my aunt asked Diane if she'd help, Diane reportedly looked her in the eye and said, "I'll handle it, don't worry." She didn't handle it. She didn't pay a single cent. She just said the words, let time pass, and moved on with her life like the promise had never left her mouth. That's not an accident. That's a pattern. I just didn't see it clearly yet. The backstabbing, the convenient disappearance whenever real sacrifice was required. I want you to understand something about my parents in this moment. They were proud people. The kind of proud that makes asking for help feel like defeat. If I had told them it was me making those payments, they would have refused the money. I knew that with absolute certainty. So I didn't tell them. I just acted. The family drama wasn't just about money. It was about who gets trusted, who gets the phone call, and who gets left out of the story entirely. And for most of my life, I'd been the one left out. I didn't call my parents. I didn't confront Diane. I didn't announce anything or demand recognition. I just sat with the weight of it for 48 hours and then made a decision that would quietly define the next 5 years of my life. Because that's what I do. I don't perform loyalty. I live it. And whatever was coming next, I was already certain of one thing. This family was not losing that house. Not on my watch. Not if I could do anything about it. What I did next, nobody saw coming. Not even me fully. Because when I ran the numbers that first night, I realized exactly what it was going to cost me. And I did it anyway. I'm a registered nurse. I work long shifts. I deal with things most people don't see. And I come home exhausted more nights than I can count. At the time, I was living in Portland, Oregon, in a 1-bedroom apartment that I shared with my cat, and a pile of medical textbooks I told myself I'd reread someday. My salary was decent, not luxurious, but enough. Enough to live. Enough, I calculated, to save someone's home if I was willing to give up almost everything else that wasn't strictly necessary. So that's what I decided to do. I set up an automatic transfer, $12,100 a month, anonymous, routed through a third-party account so my name wouldn't appear anywhere obvious. I called the bank directly, explained the situation, cleared the 3 months in arrears along with the late penalties and accumulated interest, and arranged for the ongoing payments to continue forward without my parents ever knowing the source. Each month had its own confirmation trail, logged, time-stamped, traceable. I canceled my gym membership. I stopped going out. I meal prepped every Sunday and drove a car that had no business still being on the road. I picked up extra shifts, sometimes 3 in a row, and I didn't complain about it to anyone, because what was I going to say? I'm secretly paying my parents' mortgage while my sister takes all the credit? Who would even believe that? The infidelity here wasn't romantic. It was something deeper. When someone cheats you out of your place in a family, when they lie about who you are and what you do, when they steal the narrative of your own sacrifice and wear it like a costume, that's a betrayal that goes into the bones. I was cheated out of being known. And for a long time, I told myself it didn't matter, that doing the right thing was enough regardless of whether anyone saw it. But the truth is, it did matter. It mattered every holiday I spent alone because I wasn't invited, every birthday call I didn't receive, every family photo posted online that I wasn't in. Month after month, the money moved. I watched it leave my account with a kind of quiet determination that felt almost meditative, like I was paying for something more than a mortgage, like I was paying to keep something intact that the world was trying to pull apart. I kept a spreadsheet, every payment logged, every confirmation number saved, every month ticked off like a countdown. I didn't know what I was counting down to exactly. I just knew I was building something, some kind of proof, some kind of record, and that one day, somehow, it would matter. 24 payments in, I called Aunt Patrice just to check in. She mentioned, almost in passing, that my parents had been talking about how blessed they were to have Diane looking out for them, how she was carrying the family. I listened. I said, "That's great." And then I hung up and stared at my spreadsheet for a long time. The payback I was slowly compiling wasn't about money. It was about truth. And the truth, I was beginning to understand, has a way of surfacing, no matter how deep someone tries to bury it. There was something else I noticed around this time. Something small, something that shouldn't have meant much, but it did. And once I saw it, I couldn't unsee it. It started with a scarf. A dark green scarf, cashmere, a birthday gift I'd mailed to my mother 2 winters before, that Aunt Patrice casually mentioned during one of our calls. She said, "Oh, your mother's been wearing that beautiful green scarf Diane gave her." I stopped. I actually held the phone away from my face for a second, just to process what I'd heard. Because I was the one who bought that scarf. I had the receipt. I remembered wrapping it. I remembered the card I'd written. And now Diane had given it to her? The lie was so small it almost seemed like a mistake. Almost. But here's the thing about people who manipulate. They don't lie in big, obvious ways. They do it slowly, with tiny adjustments, replacing one detail here, one name there, until the version of reality they're building starts to feel more solid than the truth. Diane hadn't just taken credit for the scarf. She had been quietly rewriting the story of our family, piece by piece, swapping her name into moments she had nothing to do with, erasing mine from chapters I had lived. Once I saw the pattern, I couldn't stop seeing it. And the answer to, if she lied about a scarf, what else did she lie about, was, once I started pulling that thread, shocking. The vengeance I felt in that moment wasn't hot or explosive. It was cold and very clear. I didn't pick up the phone and call my mother to set the record straight. I didn't post anything. I didn't confront Diane. I went back to my spreadsheet and started a second document, a log of moments, details, dates, and discrepancies. Every instance I could remember or piece together where Diane's version of events didn't match mine. It wasn't hard to fill pages, because once you start seeing the pattern, you realize the pattern has always been there. You were just too close to it to recognize it for what it was. The scarf felt like the first crack in a wall I hadn't known was there. Before that, I'd assumed my parents simply didn't know about the payments, that Diane had just stayed silent out of indifference. But now I was wondering something darker. Had Diane actively told them she was the one paying? She didn't just control invites. She controlled what they believed. Had she sat across from our parents at that kitchen table in Clarksburg, looked them in the eyes, and claimed my sacrifice as hers? The thought made me feel something I hadn't felt in a long time. Not hurt, not sadness. Something sharper. Something that had a name I wasn't quite ready to say out loud yet. I called Aunt Patrice that evening and, very carefully, I asked a few questions. Not direct ones. I wasn't ready for that. Just questions that allowed her to talk, to fill in the silences, to let things slip naturally. What she told me over the next 30 minutes rearranged everything I thought I understood about my family. The backstabbing wasn't accidental. It wasn't a series of oversights or misunderstandings. It was a campaign. And it had been running for years. My self-worth had been systematically hollowed out by someone who smiled at me at Christmas, and I had let it happen because I couldn't imagine the alternative. I saved everything. Every call log, every email, every payment confirmation. I didn't know exactly what I was building yet, but something in me understood that the truth was going to need receipts, and I was going to make sure I had every single one. Let me be precise about what Diane actually did, because I think it's important that you understand the full scope of it. Not just the surface betrayal, but the architecture underneath. Diane didn't just stay quiet about who was making the payments. She went to my parents and told them directly that she was the one saving the house. She showed them nothing. No documents, no bank statements, no proof of any kind. Just her word. And because she was Diane, the daughter who called every Sunday, who showed up at Easter, who never left, they believed her completely, without question. What followed was predictable in the cruelest way. My parents began publicly crediting Diane. At church, at family gatherings, in phone calls with relatives I hadn't spoken to in years. "We don't know what we'd do without Diane," my mother apparently told everyone who'd listen. "She's the one holding this family together." And just like that, Diane's invented sacrifice became her identity. The loyal daughter, the responsible one, the golden child who stepped up when it counted. It was a performance. A lie so consistent and so public that it had calcified into fact before I ever had a chance to contest it. The betrayal went deeper than credit. Once Diane had positioned herself as the family's financial anchor, she used that status as leverage. She convinced my parents to add her as a joint authorized signer on their bank account. "Just in case anything comes up," she said. She started making small decisions about the house, which repairs to authorize, which bills to pay, which relatives to invite for the holidays. She became the gatekeeper, and the first gate she closed was mine. I was quietly removed from the family Christmas gathering, then Thanksgiving, then my own mother's birthday dinner. The excuses were always vague. "It's a small thing this year. Maybe next time." But there was never a next time. Here's what nobody talks about when they discuss family drama. It's not the big explosion that breaks you. It's the accumulation. It's 10 small moments of being left out, lied to, talked over, and replaced, until one day you look in the mirror and you don't fully recognize the person looking back at you. My dignity had been chipped away so gradually I hadn't even noticed the erosion until I was standing at the edge. I was humiliated not in one dramatic scene but across hundreds of quiet moments where my family chose Diane's version of reality over mine, again and again. And I had let it happen because I genuinely couldn't believe the alternative, that she was doing it deliberately. But she was. She absolutely was. And I had proof. 60 payments. Every single one documented, time-stamped, and traceable, with the initial arrears and penalties bringing the full total to $145,800. I contacted my bank and formally requested a complete payment history. Every transfer, every confirmation, every date. along with the official mortgage payoff certificate from the lender once the final payment cleared. The lender's letter matched my account numbers to every payment, confirming in writing exactly where every dollar had come from. I held those documents in my hands and felt something I hadn't felt in a very long time: power. Not the kind that comes from hurting people. The kind that comes from knowing the truth and being ready, finally, completely, to let it out. What I was planning to do with those documents was still taking shape in my mind, but the shape it was taking was starting to look a lot like that gold gift box sitting open on a table in front of everyone my family had ever known. 60 payments. That's the number I keep coming back to. 60 months of waking up before my alarm, checking my account before coffee, making sure the transfer had cleared, that the house was still safe, that everything was still in place. 60 months of not going on vacation, of driving a car that made sounds I probably should have gotten checked, of wearing my shoes until the soles gave out before replacing them. When I finally made the last payment and the lender sent me the official payoff notification, I sat at my kitchen table in Portland and I cried. Not from sadness, but from the particular exhaustion that comes when you've been carrying something enormous for so long that setting it down feels almost wrong. The total was $145,800. I know that number exactly because I built it from the ground up. 60 months of transfers plus the 3 months in arrears I'd cleared at the start, the late penalties, and the accumulated interest the account had collected before I stepped in. Every dollar of it logged in my spreadsheet. That number represented every double shift, every skipped dinner out, every time I said I'm fine when someone asked why I looked tired. It represented 5 years of my life poured quietly into a house in Clarksburg, West Virginia, where I wasn't even invited to visit. The karma of that irony wasn't lost on me. I had paid for the very walls that my sister used to exclude me from. I went to the bank in person. I dressed professionally, brought my ID, and requested a full payment history. Every single transfer, with dates, amounts, and confirmation numbers. The bank officer printed it out for me across 11 pages. 11 pages of evidence. I also contacted the mortgage company directly and received the official certificate of satisfaction, the document that says, in legal language, that the debt is fully resolved and the property is free and clear. I held those documents and read them 3 times. Then I made 3 copies, sealed one in an envelope I gave to Aunt Patrice, and kept the originals. The justice I was moving toward wasn't revenge in the way people usually imagine it. It wasn't angry or theatrical. It was precise. It was the kind of payback that doesn't need a speech because the facts speak for themselves. I didn't need to call Diane out on social media. I didn't need to have a confrontation over the phone. I didn't need anyone to take my side in advance or validate my pain before I acted. I just needed one room, one moment, and the right people present. And I was starting to realize that my parents' 40th wedding anniversary party, the event I'd heard about through Aunt Patrice, the one I hadn't been told about, might be exactly that moment. I bought the gold box on a Tuesday. It was the nicest box I could find. Thick cardboard, real gold foil finish, weighted lid. I placed the documents inside carefully. The payment history, the payoff certificate, the lender's letter confirming every account number, and a handwritten note on one page that simply said, "I loved you enough to do this in silence for 5 years. I hope you see me now." I wrapped it with a white ribbon, tucked it under my arm, and booked a flight to West Virginia. I didn't book a return right away. Whatever happened at that party, I wasn't going back to hiding. That chapter was closed. The morning of the flight, I sat with my coffee and thought about all the versions of this moment I'd imagined. Some messy, some dignified, some that ended in tears, some in silence. I hadn't imagined what actually happened. Nobody could have imagined that. I want you to picture the scene, because it matters. The house on Maple Creek Road had been decorated with white and gold balloons. My mother's doing, no doubt. And through the front window I could see the warm glow of lights and the silhouettes of at least 40 people moving inside. Cars lined both sides of the street. Someone had strung lights across the porch railing. It was beautiful, in the way that things are beautiful right before something in them breaks. I stood on the sidewalk for a long moment, holding my gold box, and I thought, I paid for this house. I paid for the porch those lights are hanging from. I paid for the foundation under every one of those people's feet, and they don't even know I exist. I walked up the steps and knocked. My mother opened the door. For one full second, she just looked at me. And in that second, I saw everything I needed to see. Surprise, yes, but also something calculating. A fast-moving series of thoughts behind her eyes that ended in the same place my father's expression landed when he appeared at her shoulder a moment later. This is a problem. I smiled. I held up the box. Happy anniversary, I said, and I stepped inside before anyone could stop me. I made my way to the main table, the long one covered in white cloth where gifts were arranged, and I set the gold box down right in the center. The room was busy enough that most people didn't notice me immediately, but then I heard my father's voice. Clara. Not warm. Not surprised in a good way. I turned. He was moving toward me with the specific energy of someone who is about to manage a situation. And then he said it. You weren't invited. And the room went quiet in that awful, total way that only happens when something deeply wrong is said too loudly in a small space. The shaming was immediate and complete. I felt it land on me like something physical. The heat of all those stares, the held breath of 40 people watching a daughter get turned away at her own parents' anniversary. I had prepared myself for discomfort. I had not fully prepared myself for the particular humiliation of watching my father reach past me and physically push the gold box to the side of the table, like it was something that needed to be removed from view. Like I needed to be removed from view. I didn't cry. I want to be clear about that. I stood there and I breathed, and I reclaimed the one thing nobody could take from me in that room. My composure. I picked up the box, set it back in the center of the table, calmly, deliberately with both hands, and I said, quietly enough that only my father could hear, "Don't do that again." Then I turned and walked toward the door. I didn't run. I didn't slam anything. I walked like someone who knows exactly who they are, even when everyone in the room seems to have forgotten. The dignity I carried out of that house was the only thing I had brought in that I was sure I'd leave with. The box, on the other hand, I left on the table on purpose. I was 3 steps down the porch when I heard Aunt Patrice's voice rise above the noise of the room behind me. Her voice had that specific pitch, wide, uncontrolled, genuinely shocked. That tells you something has just happened that cannot be undone. I didn't turn back. I kept walking to my rental car. I got in, I shut the door, and I waited. Because what was happening inside that room right now was no longer mine to narrate. It was Diane's problem, and it was just beginning. I was sitting in the rental car, engine off, hands in my lap, staring at nothing in particular, when my phone buzzed. It was Aunt Patrice. I let it ring once, then answered. She was crying. Not sad crying. That particular kind of crying that happens when shock and emotion and the force of truth arrive all at once, and your body just can't hold it in any other way. "Clara," she said. "Oh, Clara. They're all reading it." I asked her to slow down. She took a breath. And then she told me what had happened after I left. After I walked out, the room had gone still for a moment in that way shocked rooms do. And then Aunt Patrice, who had watched Diane erase me for years, and who had held her silence long enough, walked directly to the table, picked up the gold box, lifted the lid, and said, loudly enough for everyone to hear, "I think we should see what's inside." My mother had tried to stop her. Too late. Aunt Patrice held up the documents, the 11-page payment history, the payoff certificate, the lender's letter, the handwritten note, and began reading. Not quietly, out loud. the way someone reads something that the whole room needs to hear. The betrayal that unfolded in that room in my absence was, by every account I received in the hours that followed, total and catastrophic. For Diane. Each line Aunt Patrice read added to a picture that was undeniable: $2,100 a month, for 60 months, plus the cleared arrears and penalties from the very beginning, all from an account in my name, going directly to the mortgage lender. Not Diane's name. Mine. The lender's letter matching my account numbers to every payment, confirming the origin of every dollar. The truth, in 11 pages, in front of everyone my family had spent 5 years believing Diane's version of events. The vengeance wasn't something I'd staged. It was just the truth, finally allowed to exist in public. I was told Diane tried to explain. She said something about arrangements and helping behind the scenes, and some version of events that I'm sure made sense inside her own head, where she'd been living with this lie long enough to believe parts of it herself. Nobody bought it. Not in a room that had just heard 11 pages of documented evidence read aloud by a woman who had no reason to lie. The karma of that moment, the completeness of it, the way truth, when properly documented, simply doesn't leave room for a counter-narrative, was more powerful than anything I could have planned. My parents stood in the middle of their own anniversary party and learned in front of 40 people that they had been lied to, manipulated, and used by the daughter they had trusted most. The party unraveled late into the night. What happened next, I only know from fragments, texts from cousins I barely spoke to, a long voice message from Aunt Patrice, 3 calls from family members I hadn't heard from in years, all saying variations of the same thing. But it was the one notification I didn't receive that night, no call from my parents, no message, no anything, that told me the most. They were somewhere in the wreckage of what they'd just learned, trying to figure out which way was up. And I was sitting in a rental car in Clarksburg, West Virginia, completely, finally, inexplicably, at peace. The next morning, I drove to a diner 3 miles from the house, ordered coffee and eggs, and sat by the window. My phone was full of messages I hadn't answered yet. Somewhere on the other side of town, in the house I had paid for, my parents were waking up to a new version of their life. One where the story they'd been told didn't hold together anymore, and where the daughter they hadn't invited was the one who'd kept everything standing. I wondered what they would do with that. And then my phone rang. Unknown number, West Virginia area code. I set down my coffee and picked up. It was my mother. I knew her voice in half a syllable. Shaky, stripped of its usual composure. The kind of voice that comes after a long night of very little sleep and a great deal of crying. She didn't say, "Hello." She said, "We're coming to you." I asked what she meant. She said, "Your father and I. We're already in the car." I looked at the clock on my phone. It was 7:14 in the morning. I thought about pointing out that I was still in West Virginia, technically just a few miles away. Then I realized she didn't know that. She thought I'd already flown back to Portland. They were preparing to drive 14 hours based on that assumption. And they were doing it without asking whether I was available, without calling ahead to check, without any kind of plan. No plan, no pride, just panic and truth. They didn't know what to say, only what they had to do. Something about that broke me open in a way the humiliation hadn't. The public shaming, the pushed gift box, the "you weren't invited." I'd braced for all of that, had carried it, had walked away from it with my back straight. But the image of my parents, 2 people in their 60s, getting in a car at dawn to drive 14 hours because they needed to look their daughter in the eye and say something that couldn't be said over the phone, that undid me a little. Not all the way. But enough that I had to set my coffee down and look out the window for a moment before I could keep talking. I told her I was still in Clarksburg. Silence. Then, "You're still here?" And I could hear, behind those 3 words, the weight of everything she was recalculating. that I had walked out of their house the night before, gotten in a car, and stayed, that I hadn't run, that I had been possibly 3 miles away while they were up all night dismantling 5 years of what they thought they knew. There was a sound on the line that I can only describe as a kind of collapse, not dramatic, just quiet, the sound of someone sitting down very suddenly. My father's voice came on, low, rough. He said my name in a way he hadn't said it since I was a child. They were at my diner within 20 minutes. I watched through the window as their gray sedan pulled into the lot, slower than it needed to, like neither of them was entirely sure they had the right to be there. They came in together. My mother's eyes were red. My father looked 10 years older than he had at the party the night before. They sat down across from me, and for a long moment, none of us said anything. The gold box, I noticed, was in my mother's hands. Sometime after midnight, they had brought it home, retied with the white ribbon, carried back to me like something they didn't know what to do with until they'd spoken to me first. The payback in that moment was not what I had imagined it would feel like. I had imagined something sharper, more satisfying, some clean, delivered justice that would close a wound. What I actually felt was more complicated. Grief and love and exhaustion all at once, sitting across from two people who had let me down in profound ways, who had also, I believed, been deceived themselves. They hadn't stopped loving me. They had stopped seeing me because someone had been standing in the way, redirecting their view. That didn't make the 5 years disappear, but it changed the shape of what happened next. My father opened his mouth. What came out wasn't an excuse. Diane, I later learned, had not come to the diner. She had left Clarksburg sometime during the night, I don't know exactly when, and I wasn't told where she went. What I was told was that she'd sent one message to my mother, a long, rambling text that was, according to Aunt Patrice, equal parts justification and victimhood, which somehow managed to make herself the injured party in a story where she had taken $145,800 worth of credit for someone else's sacrifice. I didn't respond to it. I didn't need to. My father apologized first. Not a long speech. He was never the kind of man for speeches, just a few sentences, direct and without ornamentation, the way he used to speak to me when I was a girl and he was at his best. He said he should have called more. He said he should have asked more questions. He said he was sorry that he pushed the box, and that the look on my face when he did was something he was going to carry for a long time. My mother cried through most of it. She kept reaching across the table and then pulling her hand back, like she wasn't sure she had permission to touch me yet. I let her find her own way to it. Eventually, she just took my hand and held it. I let her. But I had things to say too. And I said them, clearly, without cruelty, but without softening anything that needed to remain sharp. I told them that an apology, however sincere, does not erase 5 years. It doesn't give back the Christmases I spent alone, the birthday calls that never came, the feeling of watching my own family's social media posts from the outside like a stranger. I told them I wasn't going to pretend that saying I'm sorry over scrambled eggs in a diner in Clarksburg meant that everything was resolved. Because it didn't. And if we were going to do this, if we were going to actually rebuild something, it was going to happen on terms I helped define this time. Not Diane's terms, not silence. Mine. What I asked for was simple, really. Real contact. Not performative inclusion, not an invitation to the next holiday as a PR gesture, but actual communication, the kind that happens in the ordinary middle of life, not just at its edges. I asked them to call me when things go wrong, not after they've already been handled by someone else. I asked them to question what they're told about me, the way they would question anything important. And I told them very clearly that I would not be narrated by anyone else in this family ever again. My story belongs to me. My choices, my sacrifices, my silence, all of it was mine. And going forward, I would be the one deciding what to do with it. My dignity, I had learned through all of this, is not something anyone else can grant me or revoke. It's not located in whether my parents praised me, or whether Diane was exposed, or whether 40 people in a decorated living room finally knew the truth. It was inside me, intact, the whole time. Even on the floor of my Portland apartment the night I ran the numbers and said yes to 5 years of anonymous sacrifice. Reclaiming it wasn't about the revelation at the party. It was about having made the choice in the first place, to act from love even when love wasn't returned, and to know my own worth even when no one else was counting. We talked for almost 2 hours. The coffee was refilled 4 times. At some point, it stopped being a confrontation and became something quieter, something that felt, cautiously, like the beginning of a new arrangement. Not a reset. I want to be careful about that word, because it implies going back, and going back was not available to us. More like a renegotiation. My parents and I, renegotiating what family means when the version you've been living was built on a lie. It's slow work. It requires more honesty than most families are practiced in. But I'd spent 5 years in silence. I was ready to try the other thing. Before we left the diner, my mother slid the gold box across the table toward me. "I think you should keep these," she said. I looked at the documents inside. The 11 pages, the certificate, the note I'd written in my own handwriting. I closed the lid. I left it on the table. "I don't need them anymore," I said. "You've seen them. That's enough." And it was. Not every proof needs to be kept forever. Some of them just need to be read, once, by the right people, in the right room, at exactly the right moment. The door between us was open again. Slightly, carefully, with both of us holding the frame. And this time, I knew whose hands were on it. Here's what I know now that I didn't know 5 years ago. Being quiet is not the same as being absent, and being kind is not the same as being weak. I spent years believing that if I just did the right thing, if I kept paying, kept showing up in the ways that mattered, kept carrying what needed to be carried, the truth would eventually speak for itself. And in the end, it did. But it also cost me in ways I'm still understanding. It cost me time, yes, and money. Yes. But more than either of those, it cost me the version of my family I kept hoping I'd get back if I was just patient enough, good enough, invisible enough. The self-worth lesson here isn't the obvious one. It's not, speak up for yourself. That's the easy version. The harder version, the one I actually had to live, is this. You can do an enormous amount of good in complete silence, and it can still be used against you. The justice I was seeking for years wasn't just about being credited for the mortgage, it was about being seen, being real, being a person whose presence or absence actually registered to the people who were supposed to love her. I was invisible not because I failed to perform, but because someone else was actively performing in my place, and the audience believed the performance. But here's the thing about karma. And I mean this less in the mystical sense and more in the plainly human one. It moves slowly, and it moves through details. It was a scarf that cracked the lie. An 11-page bank statement that dissolved it entirely. Not a dramatic confrontation, not a social media post, not an angry phone call. Documents, facts, time. The truth, kept careful and patient, waiting for a room and a moment big enough to hold it. That's what justice actually looks like, most of the time. Not a lightning bolt, but a long, quiet build that ends with a lid being lifted and a room going still. Reclaiming my place in this family has not been and will not be a single event. It is ongoing. My phone buzzed again just last week. Another cousin, another "I'm sorry." Some weeks it feels natural. Other weeks I get a message from my mother that is clearly still being narrated through the lens of the old story, and I have to gently, firmly, correct the framing. The infidelity of narrative, having your own life story told by someone else without your consent, is a kind of violation that doesn't resolve at a diner over 2 hours of coffee. It resolves in the accumulation of small, honest moments over a long period of time. I'm in that accumulation now. I'm choosing to be. I've thought a lot about whether I should have told the truth from the beginning. Whether I should have called my parents the first month and said, "I'm the one making these payments, not Diane." Whether the 5 years of silence were a strategy or a mistake. Honestly, I think it was both. It protected the house. It also allowed a lie to grow large enough to reshape my family for years. If I'd spoken sooner, maybe the roots wouldn't have gone so deep. Or maybe no one would have believed me. I don't know. What I know is that silence, when chosen, should always be intentional, and eventually, it has to end. So here's the question I want to leave with you, because this is not just my story. This is the story of anyone who has ever done something good without being seen, who has been erased from their own narrative, who has wondered whether staying quiet was brave or just afraid. How long do you wait? When is the right moment to let the truth out of the box? I don't have a universal answer. I only have mine. 5 years, 11 pages, and a gold box left on a table in a room full of people who finally knew my name. And I want to know, what would you have done? So, here we are. A woman who flew 2,800 miles to be told she wasn't invited, who paid $145,800 in secret, who was lied to, backstabbed, humiliated, and shamed by the very people she was quietly saving, and who, in the end, didn't need a single word of revenge, because the truth, documented, patient, and placed in a gold box on the right table at the right moment, did everything that needed to be done. But I want to hear from you now, because this story isn't just mine. I know it isn't. Have you ever done something significant for someone, a sacrifice, a kindness, real labor, and had someone else claim it? Have you ever been the invisible one in your family, the one who carries and is never credited? Or maybe you've been on the other side of it, and this video made you rethink something. Either way, I want to know. What would you have done with that gold box? Would you have confronted Diane earlier? Or would you have waited like I did and let the documents speak for themselves? And here's the harder question, the one I keep sitting with. Is 5 years of silence wisdom, or is it self-abandonment? Is there a version of this story where speaking up sooner was the braver choice? Or does justice sometimes just need time to mature before it's ready to be delivered? Drop your thoughts below. I read every single comment. Tell me where you're watching from, what time it is there, and, most importantly, tell me your story. Because the comments on videos like this one, they're where the real conversation happens. Where people say the things they can't say anywhere else. I want this to be that space for you. And if this video made you feel something, if it made you question something about your own family, your own silence, your own worth, then please subscribe and turn on notifications. Because this channel exists for exactly this. Not surface-level content, not easy answers, but the deep, complicated human stuff. Family betrayal, reclaiming dignity, the kind of karma that doesn't arrive loud but arrives complete. There's a lot more coming. Stories that will make you rethink relationships, loyalty, and what it truly means to know your own value. Hit that bell. Come back. You belong here, even if some rooms haven't figured that out yet.